Do you know of a stellar leader or an outstanding organization that deserves a proper shout-out? Nominate them for IBJ's awards. From 40 in their 40s and Women of Influence to Nonprofit and Healthcare Excellence Awards, we're celebrating rising stars, seasoned leaders, and organizations making a difference. Discover which programs are accepting nominations now at ibj.com/nominate. Do you want to mix moments of inspiration with time to network? IBJ Media Events has you covered. From industry deep dives to awards celebrations honoring Indiana's top leaders, see what's coming up and reserve your seat now at ibj.com/register.
Welcome to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. I'm your host, Maura Johnson, and in today's episode, I'm joined by a podcasting duo that's bringing their knowledge and experience in criminal law to a new book about a case that's captivated Hoosiers across the state. Kevin Greenlee and Áine Cain are a husband and wife duo who host the true crime podcast, The Murder Sheet. Greenlee, a lawyer, and Cain, a journalist, bring their unique perspectives to the true crime genre, including detailed analysis on court proceedings and how to handle discussions of these sensitive topics with empathy and tact. The two recently came out with their first book, Shadow of the Bridge, The Delphi Murders and the Dark Side of the American Heartland, which is the first definitive account of the murders of 13-year-old Abigail Williams and 14-year-old Liberty German in Delphi, Indiana in 2017. Shadow of the Bridge takes a closer look at the investigation into the murders, as well as the subsequent double murder trial of the suspect in the case, Richard Allen, who was sentenced to 130 years in prison last December. But before we get into the episode, take a listen to a message from our sponsor, Taft.
Taft, today's modern law firm. At Taft, we cultivate a highly respectful, transparent workplace that fosters creativity, teamwork, inclusion, and diversity. We couple our culture with a client-first approach, rewarding lawyers who understand their clients' goals and work to deliver success. Taft, the modern law firm. To learn more, visit taftlaw.com.
With our new IBJ Media app, for the first time ever, you can get news from your favorite brands, Inside Indiana Business, the Indianapolis Business Journal, and the Indiana Lawyer, all in one place, delivered to you as news breaks. You can search for your favorite topics, you can get our podcast, and watch your videos. To get this app, all you need to do, go to ibj.com app download, ibj.com/app download, or you can go to your favorite app store and download it by simply searching IBJ Media.
Thank you both for joining me. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having us. It's an honor, and we're really excited to talk to you.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. To start off, can you guys share a little bit more about what your podcast is about?
Sure. So our podcast is called The Murder Sheet. It's a true crime podcast, and we're trying to sort of bring a little bit of old school journalism and legal analysis into a new media format. So it's a bit of a hodgepodge, eclectic show. We might go in depth on a case. We might interview a really interesting lawyer or an interesting author about a case or about just a topic in law or crime. And we just go where we're interested and where we feel our audience is interested.
Yeah, I'm an attorney. Áine's a journalist. And so just that combination really allows us to bring our professions to bear when we look at cases and the like.
And I'll say we're married, so it also we make fun of each other a lot at times. So if there's any humor on the show, it's us making fun of each other and being a little bit silly and not joking about cases. We take the work pretty seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously at all.
I love that. How did you get into podcasting? What brought you to this place?
I think it was Kevin's fault, so you should probably answer that.
I became friendly with the family of a victim in the Burger Chef case. The Burger Chef Murders is a quadruple homicide that happened here in the Indianapolis area all the way back in 1978. And I became aware that there was a journalist in New York who was looking into the case, and that was Áine. And so I reached out to her, and we became friends, and we started working together on that case. And it was so much fun and so enjoyable that even before we realized we'd fallen in love, I knew I wanted to keep working with her on other cases. And I think that was really the genesis of the podcast.
I don't know whether it sounds like a bad bad Hallmark movie or a bad Lifetime movie, but it's somewhere in that nexus. And yeah, it was really surreal, but it's been amazing because working with Kevin is a tremendous amount of fun. He's great to work with. And I think you sort of pitched the podcast to me at first, and I was really skeptical because coming from a media background, I was at a digital native publication, but still I was sort of like, I like that structure and whatnot and that kind of editorial standpoint. So I was just like, I don't know, podcasts feel a bit of the Wild West, and that is true. But it's been gratifying to do it our way and realize that we can bring our own ethos and our own abilities to this and not necessarily have to just copy what's come before, but sort of forge a new path in true crime podcasting. And I think our audience has been really wonderful and receptive to that.
What year did you start the podcast? I feel like it was before the true crime genre became what it is now in podcasting.
Yeah, I think there have been some shifts over the years. I think a lot of people trace the genesis of the real modern day true crime podcasting back to Serial, so a number of years ago, but it's sort of had different phases over time. Our project was the kind of stereotypical pandemic project where we started it in 2020. I think we started the process of putting it together in July 2020, and we came out with our first episodes in November of 2020 to coincide with the Burger Chef anniversary. And it's been going, we've done it weekly ever since. We started it as a weekly podcast, and now we publish multiple times a week. So we've ramped up, but we haven't stopped.
Yeah. What I love and why I listen to you guys as well is because of that. You're an attorney, you're a journalist, and that coincides in a really interesting way because you're able to bring two perspectives that almost seem like they wouldn't match really cohesive. So I guess how do you feel that your backgrounds and your professional careers inform how you approach the true crime genre and how you handle these cases?
I think when I talk to listeners, a lot of them obviously have a deep interest in true crime. They want to know why these things happen, and they want to understand what happens in the legal system. But if you're a lay person who doesn't have a legal background, even if you're interested in it, even if you're very intelligent, the law can be a completely different language. And it's really, really hard to understand if you don't have that background. So I see part of my role, maybe the most important part, is just simply to explain the process to people who are interested in the process, but just haven't had the benefit of a legal education.
And I think for me, and I think you probably feel this being on the legal beat sometimes, but I think for me, jumping into the crime beat was a bit like learning any other beat. And that's just coming in and being really curious and getting to talk to a lot of really interesting people about their experiences and research cases. And so it's almost like what I've tried to do is just be really open-minded and try to be more of a student of the crime beat rather than sort of thinking I'm ever an expert in anything. Because it's like, I'm not an attorney. I'm just a journalist. I'm here to ask the questions that other people are hopefully thinking of. And so I think that's where we balance each other out because Kevin's bringing the knowledge of his legal background, but I can be the one saying, wait, what does that mean again?
Yeah.
And we can play off of that. And sometimes it flips, but most of the time I would say that's the structure.
Yeah. Well, and I would say especially I'm thinking about the lawyers' audience and how they are mostly legal professionals who get these like these topics that are understandable for them, but for a layperson like me who doesn't have a legal education is very intimidating. And I feel like it is refreshing to hear you guys go back and forth to talk about these things and break it down in a way that a layman can understand it.
Thank you so much. And I guess I'm at a point in my career where I don't mind, like, I don't see anything ever as a dumb question. Even if it feels embarrassing for me to be asking her, like, can you please explain this? But for me, I know that it's really complicated. And like Kevin said, it is a different language. So I just am like, I'm willing to basically jump on that and say, let's slow down and explain this because I don't get it. And we bring that to a case too. But I think we just try to come into it just with a level of like, we don't know everything about every case. We don't know everything about anything. I remember when I was reporting on Walmart, there was this whole thing where people were always complaining, oh, the Walmart cashiers aren't at the cashiers. They're just being lazy. And then when I dug into it and talked to a bunch of people who worked at Walmarts around the country, they were all like, okay, we're deeply understaffed. So everyone might make an assumption about something, but then when you really report it out, it could be something totally that you didn't expect or you weren't aware of. And so coming from a business reporting background, it taught me enough about journalism to expect some of those surprises and just be a bit open-minded until you really report something out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the beauty of journalism is just you keep pulling strings until something is exposed and you understand it better, I guess.
Yeah, it's so fun.
So now turning to your book, your first book, Shadow of the Bridge, can you talk more just about your motivation to explore this case, not only obviously in the podcast format, but also now in the new book?
So I think for both of us, we both are huge true crime readers. We grew up and sort of have lived through life reading things like The Onion, Field, and just deeply reported true crime works or crime nonfiction works. And I think both of us have felt that some cases are well served by a podcast where it's serialized updates of here's what's going on, or let's unfold the story in this kind of intimate way where we're sort of speaking to you. We also feel a lot of cases, like the Delphi case that are complex, are served by just a book where you can sit down and lay everything out in one go, because it's easier. I mean, it's easier for us to follow it that way.
Yeah, we've heard from a lot of people who became aware of this case maybe while the Richard Allen's trial for the murders was going on. And they say, we'd really like to know the background of this case. And it was hard to point to a place where you could get the whole story. We've done a lot of podcasts, and what do? Do we say, oh, go listen to 100 hours of our podcasts? That's not realistic if you're just jumping on, but this is a way for people to get the entire story in one go. And there are things that it took us years to figure out, and it's just all here laid out in narrative form.
Speaking to this case, this story specifically, what I guess was the draw to do a book about this?
I think for me personally, and I don't know if Kevin, you feel a different way, but the more we dug into this, I guess the tragedy and the loss of these two young girls, of Libby German and Abigail or Abby Williams, they're 14 and 13, just these beautiful, wonderful kids who have their lives ahead of them. And they didn't get to live that. I mean, that was really selfishly and horribly taken away from them. And not only them, but their families, their friends, their communities, left traumatized. So for me, there's just such a human tragedy at the heart of this that I wanted people to understand this story, because sometimes I felt throughout all that's happened with this case, Abby and Libby have been lost in it. And what they did, what they accomplished in their final moments, essentially identifying their killer, playing a key role in his arrest and prosecution and whatnot, I felt it was really important for people to understand what was lost here, how it affected people, and what these girls accomplished at the end of the day. Because if you talk to people close to this case who worked on this case, one thing that we heard again and again is those girls are heroes, because what they were able to do and have the presence of mind to do was extraordinary. And the fact that they never left one another is also extraordinary, their bond and their friendship. So I guess on some level, on a human level, wanting to honor that, and then on maybe a journalistic level, being really curious about how did this all unfold. It's been a controversial case. It's been a highly publicized case. What's the real story? We're all sort of looking on the outside of this darkened house and making guesses. So I feel like in the end, we finally got to go in the house and look around and really see what was in there. And
what was it like to investigate this case? What was it like to prosecute the case and put this case together? What sacrifices did some of those people have to make in order for this to happen? A lot of those are stories that have never been told because there was a level of secrecy about the case. And I think those stories are really worth telling and knowing. And I should say that's what the focus of the book is. This is not one of those books where it's just Áine and I talking about, oh, it was really hard to do this. We focus on the investigators and the prosecutors and the girls.
I hate books that are purported to be nonfiction crime books, but they're secretly memoirs. And sometimes that can be done well. There's some good examples of that are great. But oftentimes I just feel like it's like, I don't want to hear about your issues or whatever. And we really are not very much in the book. We're taking more of a lens of the scope of this. There's so many different characters, so many investigators, so many attorneys involved. And what we're really trying to do is like, who are these people? What are they doing? And I think it's important, as Kevin said, there has been secrecy around this case. So now is the time for some of this to come out and we can all examine it together.
I just assume people know, but I guess I should probably...
Yeah.
I'm just going to take a break, and then I'm going to go back to what you were talking about, them being heroes, just explaining what you mean by that.
Totally.
So for those who are not familiar with the case, can you give me a breakdown of what exactly happened?
Absolutely. So February 13th, 2017 is an unseasonably warm day in Delphi, Indiana. Delphi is a small city in a very rural county, Carroll County, in Indiana, which is, this is all to the north of Indianapolis. And it's very farming, and it has these beautiful forested trails that are the former railways that went through the area and are now been converted to trails for people to enjoy. So that day, the kids in town have school off because they had an accumulation of snow days. And just the way it worked out, they were given a day off. And Abby and Libby are very good friends, very close friends. They're in middle school together. They do a bunch of extracurricular activities together. They decide they've had a sleepover at Libby's grandparents' house. And they decide we're going to walk the trails. Just a very normal thing to do. I think one of the reasons this story resonated with people is so many people could imagine doing that themselves or having their kids do that themselves. It's a pretty low-risk activity. And unfortunately, it ended in tragedy. They never returned. They were later found murdered. And what investigators found was Libby's phone had captured the moments leading up to their abduction. And what it captured was a shaky video of a man approaching Abby on this Monon High Bridge, which is part of the rail system. We've been there. We've never been on it. I'm terrified of heights. It is a terrifying bridge. Mm-hmm. It is very high up in the air. Like, they had nowhere to run, is what I'm trying to say here. It was just this rickety bridge. Kids in the area would cross it as a rite of passage of, like, it's kind of a brave thing to do because it's swaying, it's creaking, it's really scary up there. But what you see is Abby's finishing her journey across the bridge, and behind her is a guy. And so not only did Libby capture his image and the clothes he was wearing, but she also captured his voice. And you hear him saying, "Guys, down the hill." And you also hear a clicking noise in there, which sounds like the racking of a gun. So you hear this guy accosting them, threatening them, ordering them down the hill. And so it sort of was that initial really important clue for investigators when figuring out what happened to the girls. So you have Libby capturing this moment. You also have Abby playing a role because the phone was found under her body under a shoe. So there is some speculation that she maybe purposely hid that at some point. So these girls, by working together, were able to conceal this evidence that ended up becoming very important against the man who was prosecuted.
And yeah, in a case that honestly didn't have a lot of physical evidence, that kind of was the, what I guess prosecution and defense were relying on with this.
100%. There's no fingerprints. There's no DNA. So what you have is this video and a couple of other crucial pieces that come together. But this, I would argue it's the centerpiece.
What sort of challenges did you both face while not only covering the case leading up to the trial, but also in the trial, which I know is a big crux, obviously, to the case?
One thing that was interesting about the trial was the judge in the case, Judge Fran Gull. She really concentrated, as she should have, on protecting the rights of Richard Allen, the man who was on trial for the murders. And giving the public access to the proceedings was a much, much lower priority for her. So there was a certain level of secrecy around a lot of court events, and actually being able to physically attend the trial became very, very difficult because of that level of secrecy and those levels of restrictions, and because of the interest. So in order to attend this trial every day, we had to get up very, very early in the morning. And when the trial began, we'd have to get in line for a 9 a.m. court session at midnight or 1 a.m. and be in line for 8 hours. And then as the trial progressed, that line actually started forming earlier and earlier. And towards the end, the line for the following day's trial would actually start forming at like 5:01 p.m. the day before. So just physically being there and attending the sessions was difficult, and we didn't get much sleep, didn't eat well, so that was very challenging. You want to talk about some of the other elements?
Yeah, no, I know we'll add, that was incredibly challenging for everyone who covered it. I will note traditional media outlets did get press passes, but as you were there, you were in the trenches, there was a there was an element to it where you would only get it every couple of days, potentially. Like, it wasn't an everyday thing. So it was difficult for a lot of people. I remember watching all the credentialed media going in, and they'd be like, good luck, keep fighting the good fight. And I'd be like, I hate you. We're like, I want your media back. Not really. They were great, and they were doing a great job. But I was just like, I want your media pass, because that would at least be something. So that was very difficult. It was emotionally challenging. I actually had to leave one day because the stuff they were showing was so horrible, and I just couldn't deal with it anymore. It was deeply sad. I mean, ultimately, you're sitting there, you're seeing a number of rows filled up with the victims' families, and you're just thinking, they lost their babies. Like, this is whatever the outcome is, that's not going to change. So it was heavy. And I would say this case, unfortunately, pre-trial attracted a lot of attention that sort of ultimately, what I would say, morphed from what was probably well-intentioned sort of participation from members of the public, morphed into something a little, I would say, actually pretty dark, that became more like a mob or some kind of conspiracy theory movement that was moving away from the facts of the case and more towards this sort of emotional, charged rhetoric around Richard Allen's being railroaded, we need to save him. And it was really, again, highly emotional, not really fact-based, or taking actual facts and twisting them around to the point where they're unrecognizable. And they targeted their ire on a lot of different people in this case. Investigators, Judge Gull, us, other reporters. It wasn't just us, but that was difficult and a bit scary at times, because people got threats, people got death threats, people had their houses doxxed, and it was just kind of like a bit perplexing about why that was happening and sort of how out of control that got.
Which I think, especially to go back to, this is a small community. And even further, this is Indiana, where we don't see a lot of high-profile cases. I'm sure it was probably deeply shocking and confusing to be working on this case, be covering this case, and have all of these parts happening. And at the heart of it, it's two little girls. It's a very complex thing to think about.
It really is. And that's really well said. And I'll just add to that, like, a lot of the noise came from outside of Indiana. And it was odd to see from like outside perspectives of people who are not really familiar with that area. And to be clear, we don't live in the Delphi area. So we were outsiders too, to a certain extent. We're having to come and visit and take in the community as well. But when we would hear people describing it, it would be like completely alien to what the actual, like, people would be talking about Delphi as if it's like controlled by the cartels, or like the meth capital of the world, or like the most corrupt place on earth, and everyone's just a sinister character, like rubbing their hands together in an evil manner. And it's like, you go there and it's just a city. It's got drug problems like other places in Indiana and other places around the country, but it ultimately, when we went there and we communicated with people there in the community, it was a community that's filled with nice, normal people who were deeply, deeply affected and hurt by the fact that this happened to two kids. Just like a normal place, like, imagine your own neighbors if something like that happened. And I think kind of some of this, I think to touch upon what you were saying, I think some of the conspiracy theorizing came from the understandable place of people wanting the conclusion of the story to be bigger than it was. And I think they wanted more of an explanation. I think they saw this as, it's their obsession. It's this case they've thought so much about. It has to be this complex, wild conclusion. And the fact that it was ultimately brought down to one man doing this, I think was unsatisfying for people in the story they were telling themselves. And I think that fueled more suspicion, perhaps.
I lost my train of thought. Oh, going back to just talking about how deeply impacted this community was. When you were working on this book, were you able to really talk more to the community in just your reporting and just get a better idea of what Delphi looks like in the midst of all this? Yeah, I would definitely say it's interesting with Delphi. The story also touched upon a city, Peru, in Miami County.
And a person who was sort of a person connected with the case, Kegan Kline, is from there, and that's where that case unfolded. And it turned out that he wasn't directly involved with the murders or anything like that. He wasn't prosecuted, but he was charged with a number of pretty heinous crimes himself. And in that city, I think because they hadn't had the experience of sort of losing these two girls, people were very willing to talk to us and like, oh, I'll give you all the background. Here's what's going on. Like, people were very, very immediately wanted to talk, very welcoming, lovely. I love Peru. It's just a wonderful, wonderful city. And with Delphi, it was sort of the opposite. Because they had been enduring this since 2017, it was like a siege. It was like a siege mentality of like, we're here. All these sort of new media podcasters are willing to basically take our photos from Facebook and put them in these crazy videos saying that we're murderers at the drop of a hat based on nothing. So we need to protect ourselves and be more closed off. There was a sense of collective trauma of like, after this happened to the girls, I couldn't let my own kids go out and play because who knows? They never caught the guy. So he might do something to some other kids. And it was just, and because it's a small community, pretty much everyone either knew Abby or Libby, or if they didn't, they might know a family member, or they might know a friend. It's very interconnected. So it was a deep, unhealed wound. And so we really had to work hard to earn the trust of people there, that they would not just think we were coming into this and exploiting their pain and then bouncing in 2 minutes, parachuting into it. So we had to, I think, do a lot of reporting and do a lot of work to earn that trust and show that we meant no harm. We were looking for the truth, but we're not looking to randomly point the finger at some guy because we posted side-by-sides and got a audio of his voice, and we weren't going to be irresponsible, in other words. And so as we did that, I think the town opened up to us more, and I think people there opened up to us a lot more. And I remember we were like stumbling around Delphi in trial. I think it was during verdict watch, and these lovely women came out and just gave us cookies and hurried back away. And we're just like, thank you. Like that's Delphi. It's quiet. It's like, it's quieter, and they are still wounded and they are still wary. But I think when people come and show that they're sincere, it is a welcoming place. And we were able to talk with a lot of people.
It's a very welcoming place. And one thing about the process of doing the reporting specifically for the book that was very rewarding for me is that for the bulk of the time we covered the case on the podcast, there was a gag order in place, which meant that people connected with the case, be they witnesses or attorneys or what have you, they were not permitted to talk to anyone. So you could see these people in court or elsewhere, and you'd have no idea what was going through their minds or what it was like to do this and go through this experience. After Richard Allen was sentenced back in December of 2024, the gag order was lifted. And so suddenly all these people were available to talk and share those experiences with us. And I found that immensely rewarding.
Yeah. Can you talk more about that? And I know that you've had some of these people on the podcast. What was it like, I guess, to be able to speak to them one-on-one and just learn more about their role in the case and how it all impacted them as well?
It was really fascinating because it's, as I say, we watched them in court. We knew what they were doing, but that's really only half the story when you don't know what it's like for them and maybe while they're making some of the choices that they are making. So to sit down with them and just talk with them, and in some crazy way, we had really been so focused on this case and it was very traumatic for us. It was much more traumatic for them. And so it was almost at times almost like group therapy, just talking about this terrible thing that we had all gone through. And I think to some extent, I'm never going to understand it as well as the people who investigated the case or who prosecuted the case or what have you. But I understand it more than maybe the people in their social circle would. And so they were able to really unload a lot of stuff. And I found that really rewarding, as I say.
Yeah,
what about?
It was a privilege. And I would just say, like, yeah, I think the biggest thing, we were used to reading the court filings, watching the testimony, maybe seeing brief interactions in the hallways of the court. But getting to sit across from a table from some of these folks, and I think what struck me was how many of them actually cried or got choked up talking to us when it came to the topic of the girls, and just learning, yes, they're professionals. Yes, this is their job. This is what they're supposed to do. But I think how much they internalized it. So many of them internalized it, and so many of them took it truly personally. And that was pretty remarkable to see. And that was something I think we could only get there at the end when it was over.
I think something that we've already talked about here, and something that we see a lot maybe in the true crime genre in general, is how everything is very blown up to be very dramatic and very making it a little bit more than what it is, which can be dangerous because, again, you have these people who are real people. They're working on this case. It is deeply impacting them. So can you talk about, both in the podcast and the book, how you've approached the true crime genre while still speaking with tact and speaking with and researching with the empathy that you have in both of your individual professions?
First of all, thank you. And second of all, I would say what we tried to do in our personal ethos when we are looking at crime, and this is just something we've sort of developed ourselves over the years, is just usually the more boring version is the true version. And that's not always true. To be clear, you have to go where the evidence is pointing. Sometimes the evidence is going to point you to something remarkable and totally out of left field that you never expected. But oftentimes, when someone's giving you a story that sounds implausible and is not really being backed up by anything else, you have to be very skeptical of it. And just because it's the more interesting story that you think might get more clicks or you think people might be more interested in hearing about, doesn't mean it's right to basically go down that alley. So a lot of the times, and people would get pretty annoyed at us about this, or maybe even very angry in some cases, if people who were like following on YouTube would be telling us, oh, well, everyone says it's a corrupt law enforcement up there. You need to dig into this. And we'd be like, sure, like give us some information about what's going on. And it would be like, well, this YouTuber said that. And you'd be like, okay, but I need something concrete. And people, I think people just, anything goes in the wild west of new media, especially with true crime. And people don't realize like their words have power. And if you're going to say something, you should have facts to back it up. And facts, concrete pieces of evidence, not just conjecture or I don't understand how this works, so I assume it's bad. There's a lot of like ignorance that then gets channeled into conspiracy theories out there because people don't know how the legal system works. They don't know how police investigations work, and they just make assumptions that lead them to conclude, this is fishy. And we just try to be somewhat humble about it and say, we're going to be led by the evidence. And if someone has some interesting evidence, we're going to go wherever it takes us. But we need that starting point. We can't just cruise in on vibes and sort of declare. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people in true crime who should know better end up doing that because they see there's an audience that wants to be validated in their conspiracy theories. And they say, in my professional opinion, you're right. And it's like people eat that up and they're sending them money and clicks, and it's like a little community. And I don't know how they live with themselves, I guess, because I can't imagine doing that. It's just, there's no integrity in that. And sometimes you have to be willing to say to people, like, listen, I hear where you're coming from emotionally. You, on some level, want there to be a conspiracy because it makes sense to you. It makes it make sense, this horrible thing. But if we don't have anything with that, we're not going to say that. And we can't do any reporting on it if we don't have a starting point here.
Yeah, I think it's really important to always remember that there are human beings at the center of this. These are not characters in an Agatha Christie novel or in a game of the board game Clue. These are real people who live and have emotions, and that really needs to be respected. I often think at one point during our coverage of this case, we were sent crime scene photos, which showed the bodies of both girls. And unbeknownst to us, these crime scene photos had also been sent to other people, like YouTubers and stuff. We didn't know that. But as soon as we got those crime scene photos, we realized this is a catastrophic leak. This is really going to affect a lot of people. It's going to affect the families of the victims. It's also, frankly, something that could negatively impact the rights of Richard Allen to have a fair trial. So as soon as we got those photos, we reached out to the prosecution and the defense and said there was a leak and we're not going to report on it, figure it out. And as I said, these photos have been sent to other people, and they instead of doing that, they just kind of like traded them like they were like baseball cards or something. And that just underscores to me how easy it is to forget these are real people. These are not photos that you'd be like scrutinizing to look for clues. It's not Where's Waldo. Those are real little girls. And these are girls that should be alive today. And they deserve to be treated with more respect and dignity than they were accorded.
And I'm just going to say this. We're not crime scene analysts. We're not experts in that. There's so much in true crime where people are just trying to wear all the hats and say, well, my hunch is this, or this is what I think based on. Who cares what you think? Like, we care what the experts in court say under oath. There's too much. Like, I think our role on our show is when we're having discussions that touch upon topics that we're not really super familiar with. We invite on a guest who's able to speak through that for us. And maybe, say, mental health. We have a mental health professional on to talk about all the different facets of that and how it's treated in an carceral setting and whatnot. That's where we can benefit. But it's not just us coming out with that information because we don't have that expertise. And I think people in Delphi just sort of thought, if I have a microphone, everything I have to say is valid and worth hearing. And what we found is, honestly, one of the most important things about our job was deciding what not to report on or what not to even platform because we just didn't reach that level.
To wrap things up, who do you hope this book serves, and how do you hope it does serve the audience that chooses to read it?
One question I hear all the time when I see people is, do you think they got the right person? And I think one of the reasons for that is there was a lot of secrecy in the case. People have been told things that, maybe they weren't allowed to present a defense for Richard Allen, so maybe he is really innocent. And so one thing I hope this book does is I hope it lays out clearly the whole story, including the case against Mr. Allen. And I hope it really sets people's minds at ease about the case against him and the conviction.
For me, one thread of the book that was really important for us to include, I think, was some of the social media mobbing, some of the social media harassment, some of the sort of people getting themselves involved into this story in a way that we felt disingenuous and unethical, and that caused problems for real people, the leak being a good example. And for me, what I hope it does and what I hope it serves to do is talk to people who are interested in true crime, most of whom I strongly believe are just interested in the topic, and they want to learn about the law. They want to learn about crimes. They want to advocate. They want to basically support people they feel might be wrongfully convicted. They want to support unsolved cases and raise awareness. All very pro-social, excellent reasons to be interested in the topic. But what I want to do is put out a call to them and sort of have us as a true crime community examine some of the behaviors that are not acceptable and antisocial and be able to delineate those. You don't want to take away people's ability to advocate or say, here's what I feel about a case. But can we do that without sending emails telling people they should die? What's the limit? I think if we can come up with an ethical framework for true crime and what's okay and what's not okay, and how can we encompass a lot of different opinions on different cases without crossing some of these boundaries, I think that would be wonderful. Because again, I really do believe in true crime and that it can be a positive, but this ain't it.
Let me say one more thing. Once on the podcast, we interviewed a prosecutor in a small Indiana county about another case altogether. And I just remember sitting there and listening to him talk about how committed he was to find justice in that case. I was thinking, this is a man I've never heard of, and he's a hero. He's really working really, really hard to get justice for the people in his community and in his town. And no one's ever going to know his name or really appreciate him outside of this one community. And covering this case, there was a lot of people like that who really found themselves caring deeply about this case. Some of them lawyers, some of them investigators, and they really devoted their all to it. And I think those men and women are heroes, and people should know how hard they work to find justice for Abby and Libby.
All right, Áine and Kevin, thank you so much for joining me and for sharing your insights. Thank you for listening to the Indiana Lawyer Podcast. If you'd like to hear more from Kevin and Áine, you can find The Murder Sheet wherever you get your podcasts. Their book, Shadow of the Bridge, is also available for purchase right now. And as always, you can find more legal news from across the state on our website at theindianalawyer.com. There you can subscribe to our newsletters and find podcasts from across the IBJ Media Company. You can also follow us on social media.
Stay ahead with Inside Indiana Business Radio on Demand, your go-to source for the latest business news across the Hoosier State. Join hosts Gary Dick and Alex Brown every weekday morning and afternoon for concise updates on Indiana's top business stories. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app or listen at ibjpodcasts.com.
Do you want to know what really drives change in Indiana? You won't find it in sound bites, you'll find it in stories. Stories from CEOs, lawyers, coaches, entrepreneurs, and community advocates. That's the IBJ Media Podcast Network. Insightful, local, impactful. Find all of our shows by searching IBJ Media in your podcast app or visit ibjpodcast.com.